Thank you so much. So, hi everyone. Today, I will present some of our findings regarding precarious employment situations experienced by marginalized population from one of our case studies that we conducted among the Toronto's Bangladeshi community. Um, So a bit of the background about this project is that this project is funded by a Shark Partnership Grant. Some of us may know that grant. It's titled Policy and Practice in Return to Work After Work Injury, Challenging Circumstances, and Innovative Solutions. It's a mouthful. So Dr. Stephanie Premji from McMaster University led this sub-project in partnership with South Asian Women's Rights Organization, which is a small nonprofit organization that is run by and works primarily with Bangladeshi women in Toronto's neighborhood of Oak Ridge and Crescent Town. So a bit of a context about this study is that evidence shows that workers in precarious jobs often work through temporary employment agencies, face unsafe and hazardous working conditions, juggle multiple jobs, continues in and out of employment as they face involuntary terminations, work involuntary part-time jobs, on-call jobs with temporary contracts, and etc. And also racialized immigrants, newcomers, and or women are disproportionately found in these types of precarious employment. Research has also persistently shown how precarious employment significantly increases the risk of work-related injury and illnesses. Precarious employment factors can also make access to social support and worker compensation difficult. In addition to these, workers with intersectional identities, such as immigration, those with precarious immigration status, experiencing language barriers, experience added layers of complications to their employment experiences and in terms of statutory employment entitlement and access to benefits. So these realities, we know, like sporadically know some of the aspects of these realities, and we also know that many of these realities are not adequately taken into account by existing system. Existing policies and regulations often fail to address the unique challenges faced by precarious workers. So this project aimed to explore these issues at the community level and looked at the experiences of Toronto Bangladeshi community. So we conducted a community engaged study partnered with Sorrow following a community engaged research approach. In this partnered project, both partners were equally involved in all aspects of research process, including the design, analysis, and dissemination of data. So my role in this project was that of a research team member representing the academic partner side of this project. And I was also involved in coordinating this project as well as in all other aspects of the project. So why Bangladeshi community? So Sorrow, which is the community organization, has long been working with Bangladeshi immigrants along with other South Asian immigrants, and through their outreach and surveys, it had identified that precarious work and access to entitlements and social benefits was a significant issue within this community. Other researchers who worked with the Bangladeshi immigrants have also found that although these immigrants have university education or high pre-migration credentials, they often experience and also despite having experience in in-demand fields in Canada, they often end up in low-paid precarious employment. On the other hand, both Stephanie and I have long interest in precarious employment and return to work among marginalized population, and have also engaged with Sorrow before we in some other capacities. So both partners identified a need to study these issues and devised the research problem, and then we collaboratively implemented this project. And now we're also collaboratively disseminating the knowledge co-produced by this project. So between August 2020 and August 2021, we conducted 31 semi-structured interviews and 4 focus group discussions, each having 3 to 4 participants in it. We also conducted excuse me. We also conducted 11 key informants with people with the knowledge of Toronto's Bangladeshi community and who can also comment on the other systemic aspects. Our research was informed by political economy framework, a framework that contributes to understanding why different stakeholders benefit differently. At the same time, we also applied an equity lens to investigate the experiences of marginalized workers employed in precarious conditions. And we employed a thematic analysis approach. I'm not going in details of the methodological aspects because I have a lot to cover. So in terms of the participants who participated in the research, most of the participants were women or working in precarious field. The majority had been in Canada for 10 years or less and had immigrated under the skilled worker category and sometimes as dependents of the primary applicants. Almost all workers had post-secondary education. Some had university, many of them had university and master's level education. These workers worked in low-paid, largely shift-based jobs in factories and retails and through temporary employment agencies. So we begin by asking, how did they decide to do these jobs they were doing? So they mentioned that they were never called for an interview for a job in their field in Canada after applying to like millions of jobs. So although we know that no employers can explicitly state that they need Canadian experience. From our experience and from the participants, we know that in most cases, pre-migration credentials are not recognized. And it includes the trainings and experiences. So before these workers knew, their savings ended, all were spent, and they were ready to accept any job to survive. In most cases, they started doing these jobs as an interim solution, but they could never get out of this cycle of precarious employment. So one worker expressed as, when we came, we do not know where to keep our kids. If we want to go for childcare, we need to wait for a long period that is also a barrier to me. That's why first settling down kids and then looking for work and get rejected from work. After that, rejecting study, and after finishing the study, uncertainty of getting job. It is a lengthy process. That's why finally we entered in precarious job. So we try to look into the different aspects of precarious employment situations. So it's in terms of the relations, in terms of the conditions, and in terms of the hazards. So our study findings revealed a range of employment relations among the participants. So employment relations are power relations between employer and worker and the level of social safety net that protects worker. For example, negotiating a termination package or notice in advance and accessing employment insurance during episodes of unemployment. So our worker participants lacked standard full-time work. They held casual on-call jobs through temporary employment agencies. They experienced unpredictable terminations at any time, indicating powerlessness in the employment relations. These jobs through temporary employment agencies had no guarantee of work and income, although most of the time workers could not recall receiving any employment contracts. In cases they did, those were only short-term contracts, typically for 3 months only. Many workers reported working the same jobs for years, but only on repeated 3 months contracts. So this is practice by employers engaged in, it's called rolling pay-ups. It prevents workers from gaining seniority and organizing. For example, this worker mentioned here, I was not permanent employee there yet, although I was working there for a long period. They did not make me a permanent employee, so I stayed in the same way. So this multitude of contract types blurred the lines between employers and the temporary employment agencies. It made workers confused in terms of like determining where do they go in terms of, if they want to access their workers' rights, in cases if they had awareness about that. So we also explored the employment conditions. Added to this employment precarity around employment relations were employment conditions. So employment conditions refer to the terms and conditions like wage, number of hours, locations, responsibilities that ties a worker to a job, prescribed, often not, by law under a contract. So our worker participants reported extremely irregular scheduling and work arrangement. Uncertain scheduling made it challenging for them to plan for childcare and transportation. A scheduled work is also did not guarantee income despite incurring expenses out of pocket for childcare and transportation. I'll give you an example. So a worker, 5 minutes? So worker received a call for a job from a temporary employment agency at 11 p.m. for a shift starting at 7 a.m., which was a 2-hour commute. She promptly sought childcare and her neighbor with her neighbor and arrived at the workplace in a cold winter morning, but was sent home immediately after with an excuse of technical difficulties of machines. Although there are provisions for paying workers for at least 3 hours, our participants reported they're not receiving that. So even if they received a 3-hour payment for their for going there, how helpful is that for them to do a 4-hour commute back and forth to work, and with childcare expenses, all while getting minimum wages? So due to these precarious employment situations, uh, they were not receiving also any increments in terms of their wage, and these in and out of employment also jeopardize their access to employment insurances and other social benefits and worker compensations. So we all know that precarious employment and hazardous working conditions go hand in hand. So this was no different. So there were many physical and mental health hazards that our workers experienced. And of course, in where there is precarious employment, there will be health-related issues. So there were direct work-related injuries or illnesses that our participants also shared with us, both physical and mental health illnesses. So I'm going to, because I have very few minutes left, I'm going to explain some of the barriers that we as a team try to understand. So we have heard about the nuances of experiences of different forms of precarity and how that affect workers' access to health and access to entitlements and benefits. So from our analysis, we have noticed that a fear of losing a job that typically surpassed all workplace working conditions that is detrimental to health. So we have heard why workers entered into precarious work. Now the question is, why do they continue doing these works? Why is there a profound fear of losing a job? Why do employers and temporary employment agencies continue to do their malpractices? And what are our policies and regulations doing in this regard? Well, part of this can be explained how certain policies in Canada work. As a neoliberal political economy, Canada creates, supports, and fosters policies that allow economic growth. Economic growth often manifests as profit maximization by employers who are deregulated as a neoliberal economic measure. So profit maximization is also inherently involved with exploitation of workers. Moreover, the neoliberal principle of flexibilization allows employers to rapidly bring changes to the size and composition of their workforce to adapt to the changing economic conditions. Now, this helps us explain why there is a proliferation of temporary employment agencies. They are ready with a reserve pool of workers, which employers can use flexibly as per their need, all while ensuring profit maximization. Anything goes against their plans for the jobs designed to maximize profit, the worker is no longer required. So this creates a fear among workers that if not them, they will quickly move to the next worker available. There are other reasons why hiring through temporary employment agency is widely practiced, although that too falls under the intent for profit maximization. But we know that more hazardous the job is, there are more risks of injuries and illnesses. Employers whose workers sustain injury, they're required to report it to the Worker Compensation Board. More the injury incidences, premium increases proportionately. So employers of hazardous work nature looks for ways to bypass this need to report. Employers hire through, and thus they hire through temporary employment agencies. So this is a form of claim suppression. So temporary employment agencies, on the other hand, supplies workers to many different types of industries. So their premium rates are determined for themselves, not for the clients whose work is more dangerous. Now, how is it that it is happening under all these policies we have in this welfare regime to ensure workers' rights and health and safety? Why not clients of temporary employment agency whose work is more dangerous are required to pay the premium to WSIB directly? That would remove the incentive of using temp workers. Well, Section 883 in the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act in Ontario was created back in 2014 under the Bill 18 to allow government to make regulations that would make the client, that would basically change the situation where the client employer will directly report to WSIB, which is the Worker Compensation Board in Ontario. But this bill was only passed. It was one of those omnibus bills with a bunch of changes to a bunch of acts. So, Worker Safety and Insurance Act, this change was never proclaimed in force. But there are a few incidences, tragic incidences in Ontario. If some of you may recall the death incidences at Fiera Foods, who were using temporary workers. So after those incidences, the government was forced to proclaim this act in 2018. However, they did not do it. No regulations to enforce this has ever been created. The workers' advocates pressured the government continuously. In 2021, WSIB, which is the Worker Compensation Board in Ontario, had a consultation on policies that made temp agencies pay the rates of the client, which is the client employer, for the workers sent to the placement employer. But this will get the WCB the money they need. It should for workers in dangerous job, but it does not have the same impact on employers. The employer's record stays clean, and temp agencies can combine its WSAB charges with other lower rates paid in other lines of work and charge customers an average rates of WSAB. So you see the difference. So there is even an exception for temporary employment agencies that don't keep separate books for different types of supplied labor. So there is always this, way around. So despite the intent of these welfare regime policies that we want to ensure workers' rights, the workers' rights are not ensured. We have seen from our experiences, from our workers' experiences from this study. And we can probably attribute all these outcomes to the neoliberal political process driven by economic interest. Now, I have other findings that highlights the policies related to the equity and the racialized and immigrants aspects, but I don't have time to go through that. So we co-generated some recommendations on policy changes in terms of temporary employment agencies and how that should be regulated. So those can be found in this full report available here in the and the last line, the hyperlink here. So that concludes my presentation. Thanks for attention. Thank you.